going to be much of a writer. I just felt like I'm a little tiny baby. Mommy and Papi were living in this community before it was Washington Heights. That happened later. And my older sister and I were born at Columbia Presbyterian. They were very homesick, and they wanted to go back home. But it was la dictadura de Trujillo, and Papi had already gotten in trouble as a student. But once they got married, they decided, bueno, vamos a ver, la cosa está cambiando, things are changing, it's going to be a different world. Elections were being held, elections entre comillas, and they went back. So when I was 1 month old, we went back, and so always these two countries were part of the conversation. Born in the United States, went back to La República Dominicana, to a big, huge, extended familia. And,
wow.
Okay, in my papi's family, it was a huge familia. The first wife had 10 kids, and then she died. And I have to explain, she didn't die of childbirth, she died. And then he married her first cousin and had 15 more kids. And Papi was the youngest of all the 25. Abuela's the one in the middle. Oh, I don't know what they're doing holding up those coconuts. There must have been some joke going on. And this was in Licey, outside Santiago. And they would have these, tú sabes, reuniones, the whole familia would come. And it was before the wide-angle lens, you know? So parte de la familia would come up and have their picture taken, and then another parte de la familia, you know, when the little photographer would come. So I love this picture because it just gives a sense of what a complicated, crazy familia. You know, the wonderful thing is that when you come from a familia like that, you have the tíos que son borrachos, and la tía that wants to be a nun, and you have the tía gets a flirt, and you have all these characters, and they're crazy. But the thing you love, the thing that's wonderful about these familias is you learn about diversity. They don't call it that. Tú sabes, el tío es loco, but he's your tío, you know. El primo es bruto, pero es tu tío. Es tu primo, you know. So you really do learn about accepting each other, you know, in a familia. So I just have ese es mi padrino, el tío Federico, and he's having his 80th birthday. This is later on the line, but there's always huge familia. I was joking earlier, you know, when you go to parties in this country, and you're just supposed to bring your significant other. Like, what does that mean when you're how do you just say that only one other person can come with you? You have to bring the whole family, you know? So the parties were big, and I grew up with a lot of tias. Always there was tias, tia Ana, tia Luz, tia Bella, tia Laura, tia Luz de nuevo, tia Silviana, tia Rosa. So I grew up with all these tias. And one of the wonderful things is, you know, I often thought they call it a nuclear family for a reason. It's like a bomb. You want an extended familia. Because if mommy's in a bad mood, you have so many other tias. There's always somebody in the familia that you can go to. You're raised by this huge extended family. And so when people ask me, that's me, I was a blonde. And I was gordita, believe it or not. A little gordita. And when people say, well, what was your childhood like? Because we were living in the middle of a dictatorship. And the truth is, it was a happy childhood. Because all I remember is there was always a hand to hold. You'd reach up, somebody had your hand. Somebody had your back covered. Familia was a buffer. And so things happened, a deal would disappear, somebody was in trouble, but there was the protection of this family around you. And that's the thing that I remember most about growing up in the DR. There were characters. There was El Tío Percio. One of his eyes was a glass eye. but you couldn't tell which one it was, you know? So it was a big thing, and he had a long barba, and he was a reader. So Gilberto was always kind of one of the crazy uncles, but he was so interesting. Then there was Balbina. Balbina made a promesa when she was a young woman that she would never get married. And she always wore all these like rosarios and santicos, all this protection. And the other promesa she made, I don't know why, was that she would always dress in purple. Always in purple. So her underwear was purple. Her clothes, you can't tell because it's a black and white photo. But the other thing that was really weird about Balbina is, Balbina, you will think that I made this up, and I didn't. See, if you're Dominican, you don't have to worry about having a good imagination. It comes with the territory. You have these families. Anyhow, Balbina, one of the things Balbina was preparing herself for was eternity. So she slept in her coffin. She had her coffin, and she would sleep in her coffin, and when we were kids, and we would come, the big thing was to go up to Balbina's bedroom, a ver la caja de Balbina. She had her, and the sides of her coffin, what color were they? Purple. She lived to be 100 years old. When she was 100 years old, they gave her a birthday party, and the cake, the Kool-Aid, everything was purple. So that's Balbina. So if you ever read Before We Were Free, there's a character named Chucha. I gave her a different name, but she makes a promesa that she's only going to wear purple. And people say, Julia Alvarez has this fantastic imagination. Mentira. So we were also growing up, as I mentioned, in the dictatorship of Trujillo. So here's Trujillo. Some of you, most of you are too young to, you're probably hearing about Trujillo from the earlier generation, my generation, my parents' generation. And this is, I have that picture, I had this picture mostly for the younger kids that came, so they would understand what it was to live in una dictadura, you know, where there was torture, there was a secret police, there was, you know, a kind of world that it's even hard for me to imagine, because even though I lived in it for the first 10 years, I really wasn't consciente of what was going on. All I knew is that I heard later in this country about these women, las hermanas Mirabal, that started the underground group against the dictatorship. We have Minerva Mirabal, we have Maria Teresa, and we have Patria. So it wasn't really till I came to this country, I still remember the Time magazine article when they were killed, it being reported, and asking Mommy and Papi about it. And even then they were afraid to talk. Because remember, the Galines had been killed and kidnapped from New York City and taken back. So there was still fear when we were here about talking about the dictatorship. But I heard, we were in this country, and after Trujillo was killed, I heard about the Miramar sisters. And I always thought about these sisters that didn't get to make it out, you know, be alive. And here my sisters and myself and my parents had made it to this country. So it was you know, a lot of times people say, where do you get your ideas as a writer? And I say, it's a pebble in my shoe. You know, they think you get a fancy idea, an intellectual idea. No, it's like something that you get, like in your shoe, and you can't shake it out, and you keep thinking about it, and thinking about it, and wanting to know more about it. For me, that's the seed of where a book comes from. So I talk about some of the cousins. We came, and these were the cousins that were next door that were left behind. And that was my tío Meme, who was friends with Huáscar Tejeda, one of the men in the plot that killed Trujillo. And after the assassination, they came and hid out in my uncle's house, Maine. And so then they fled because my uncle's house was searched and he was taken away. So I always also knew about the family that stayed, and that here we were in the United States, and there were these cousins that had stayed behind and their papi was gone. So when I wrote Before We Were Free, I wanted to tell the story of the dictatorship from the point of view of children who stayed. And that's the cousins that are now my age, but that were left behind. And hearing their stories is where Before We Were Free came from. So here's me, my passport picture, coming back to the United States in 1960, and we landed in Nueva York. There were no Dominicanos here. I mean, very few Dominicanos. It was a very, different kind of world from the world that you find now in New York City. We came, and the promise, this is why I talk about this figure of the Statue of Liberty. The promise is that you come to this country and there's the opportunity to be free. This is a country of people that came from somewhere else. She holds up her torch and say, come to this country, this is the land of opportunity. This is the land that you can come to that will give you, a harbor, a rescue. And so we came with this idea of the United States of America. But what was it that we found when we got here? I showed this picture because we came, here we are at the Malcolm X Center. We came when the civil rights movement was just getting started. Martin Luther King, the whole civil rights movement, this is really what was still going on, the Ku Klux Klan. And part of the reason that I have this picture is because it really brings home where prejudice comes from. Here's the Grand Vizier, the grandfather, who's the head of the Ku Klux Klan. And look at his little granddaughter. She's just dressed for a costume party. Her face is still open. She doesn't know what this is about. But a few years older, look at her older brother. He's already standing like grandpa. Already has that hate in his face. So it's something that we learn, this kind of exclusion, that there is the them, and then there's the us. So the other picture that I have is because, we came to this country. It wasn't going to be like it's not a dictatorship. And what we found were kids in the schools when we came, it was before bilingual education, multicultural studies, anything like that, saying to us, go back to where you came from. And it was, wait a minute, but this is America. Didn't they hear about America? Don't they know about this country? And that's why I like this picture of the Statue of Liberty, hiding her face in embarrassment with what is going on in this country. So what happens, we come here, I told the students earlier, when we got here and came to the United States, I was a really poor student. People think if you become a writer, you were like the family intellectual, the bookworm. Mentira. I was the kid in the family, tremenda. I didn't behave. I was a poor student. I flunked every grade through 5th grade. I used to have to go to summer school because I hated school. It was so boring. The books were textbooks. Everything was memorization. What was interesting? I hated school. Always there was a note coming home from the teacher saying, Julia does not pay attention in class. She's running around, no se porta bien. I was always in trouble. But it was because my teacher didn't know the magic words. Había una vez, because the minute I would get home with all these tias and tios and storytellers, oral culture, all they had to do is start telling stories. And I would sit there paying attention. I didn't have a trouble with paying attention. I was just bored with school. But when we came to the United States, I lucked into having a great teacher. Teachers are so important. They don't get the credit they deserve. They don't get the pay they deserve. They should be the highest paid population.